The monastery lay under a heavy veil of silence, broken only by the distant, haunting echo of chants that seemed to seep from the very stones themselves. Inside the cold, stone walls, the air was thin and brittle, as if the atmosphere had been steeped in frost and forgotten warm. Dra. Marcus Hale sat awake in the cramped quarters they had set up in one of the monastery's ancient chambers. His journal lay open on his lap, but his pen had frozen mid-sentence. Outside, the wind clawed at the window panes, its mournful howl mingling with the faint, disembodied singing that plagued the halls. Marcus rubbed his tired eyes and forced himself to breathe steadily. Rationality had been his anchor since the expedition began, but tonight that anchor was slipping. The chants had invaded his dreams again, visions of monks cloaked in tattered robes, stumbling through a relentless snowstorm, their faces twisted in silent agony. He saw them reach out, desperate and lost, their voices caught in the choir that never ceased. The image faded as frost crept along the edges of his vision, chilling him to the bone. Down the hall, Elena Voss sat by the monastery's frozen fountain, its surface cracked and coated in ice. Her breath misted in the frigid air as she hummed the chants softly, her voice nearly a whisper. Around her, the frost seemed to stir, coalescing into intangible shapes that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The spirits of the lost monks, or perhaps the very essence of the choir, seemed to swirl around her, whispering secrets of faith corrupted and souls ensnared. Elena's eyes glistened with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. She had lost a sibling to similar shadows, and now the echoes of that pain entwined with the monastery's dark history. Meanwhile, Jonas Reed paced the narrow stone corridor, his footsteps muffled against the cold floor. His jaw was clenched tight, muscles taut beneath his worn jacket. Skepticism had always been his shield, but even he could not escape the creeping dread that now gnawed at the edges of his mind. Suddenly, the chanting swelled into a deafening crescendo, and a vision slammed into him with brutal force. He saw a monk tearing at his own face, fingers clawing desperately as the choir's voices twisted between ecstasy and agony. Jonas staggered, gasping for air, the image seared into his mind's eye. His usual sarcasm faltered, replaced by a raw, unspoken terror. In the chapel's shadowed corner, the ghostly figure of Father Ambrose appeared without warning. His wraith-like form shimmered, a robed silhouette with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. He watched silently as the team struggled, a tragic sentinel caught between salvation and damnation. His presence was a chilling reminder of the monastery's cursed past and the terrible pact that bound the monks' souls to the endless choir. The night stretched on, each member of the expedition wrestling with their own growing fears. Marcus battled to keep his journal entries coherent, trying to document the phenomena as if that alone could stave off madness. Elena found herself drawn deeper into the spiritual currents that pulsed beneath the monastery's stones, her connection to the choir both a comfort and a curse. Jonas's cynicism cracked under the relentless assault on his senses, and tension simmered beneath every interaction. As dawn's pale light crept weakly through the frost-crusted windows, the team gathered for a somber debrief. The visions had left their marks, haunted eyes, trembling hands, and a silent acknowledgement that the monastery's grip was tightening. Frozen fear had begun to seep into their bones, chilling them beyond the physical cold. Marcus looked around at his companions, searching for the resolve that had carried them this far. "We can't let this place break us," he said, voice steady but edged with fatigue. "We need to understand what these visions mean. They recluse fragments of the monk's story. If we piece them together, maybe we can find a way out." Elena nodded slowly. "The choir isn't just sound. It's a presence, a force that binds the souls here. We must listen not just with our ears, but with our spirits." Jonas scoffed softly, but the usual sharpness was dulled. "Listen all you want. I'm not buying into ghosts or spirits. We need facts. Science." Marcus met his gaze, unwavering. "Facts are what we'll find, but sometimes the facts aren't what we expect. The chanting resumed as they settled into uneasy silence. The visions had opened a door into the monastery's tortured past, and none could say what horrors awaited beyond. The frozen fear was no longer just a sensation, it was a living thing, creeping closer with every echoing note, ready to consume them all. And somewhere deep within the monastery's heart, the hollow choir sang on, eternal and unyielding, a frozen liturgy of faith, madness, and despair. The night was far from over, and the true descent was only beginning. The monastery's cold stone corridors seemed to hum with a life of their own as the expedition pressed deeper into the frozen silence, now shattered endlessly by the choir's haunting chant. Tutor Marcus Hale sat hunched over a rickety wooden table, his pen scratching fervently against brittle paper as he tried to capture the impossible. The voices, disembodied yet omnipresent, wrapped around the ancient chapel like a spectral fog, seeping into every crevice and hollow. Each note echoed with a clarity that defied natural acoustics, spiraling through the vaulted ceilings and down the worn flagstone floors. Marcus's keen eyes flicked up from his notes, sharp and searching, trying to reconcile the rational with the impossible. "It's like the walls themselves are singing," he muttered under his breath, voice barely audible over the ethereal chorus. His fingers tightened around the pen, the familiar tools of his trade no longer enough to grasp the phenomenon unfolding around him. Rational explanations frayed at the edges as the choir's tendrils of sound invaded his thoughts, teasing at the limits of his skepticism. Not far away, Elena Voss stood by a fractured stained glass window, the pale light filtering through, casting fractured colors across her face. Her eyes were closed, lips parting in a soft hum that quietly matched the choir's cadence. There was a strange serenity etched into her features, a fragile peace amidst the growing terror. The others watched uneasily, sensing something in her communion with the voices that they could not yet understand. Elena seemed to draw strength from the chant, a tether to a realm beyond the physical, yet there was an undercurrent of something darker, a flicker of unease beneath her calm. Jonas Reed's restless pacing broke the fragile stillness. His scowl deepened as the oppressive chanting gnawed at his nerves, the invisible grip tightening with every passing moment. "This is madness," he snapped, voice sharp and edged with frustration. "We're chasing ghosts and shadows. We need to focus on facts, not fairy tales." Marcus looked up, meeting Jonas's glare with a wary steadiness. "And what facts do we have, Jonas? No bodies, no source of the voices, and a sound that defies physics. This is beyond superstition." Jonas's jaw clenched, but he said no more, the tension between them a palpable thread stretching taut in the cold air. Meanwhile, Sylvia Klein was engrossed in her instruments, her glasses slipping slightly down her nose as she adjusted the recording devices scattered around the chapel. The spectral choir's acoustic signature was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The data streamed through her equipment in layers, notes folding over notes, harmonics that bent and twisted through space, creating a soundscape that was alive and breathing. Her scientific curiosity battled with a rising dread as the patterns in the recordings defied all known principles of acoustics. "It's as if the sound itself is a living entity," Sylvia whispered to Marcus when he approached, her voice tinged with awe and alarm. "These voices, they were not just echoes. There is something else entirely." Marcus nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. This choir was no mere haunting. It was a force, ancient and unknowable, that ensnared the senses and frayed the mind. Throughout the chapel, the chanting swelled and receded like a tide, enveloping the explorers in its cold embrace. The air grew thick with a strange electricity, the line between the physical and the spectral blurring as the choir's influence seeped deeper into their souls. Elena's humming grew louder, a desperate attempt to connect, to find meaning within the endless song. Yet the others watched her with growing concern, the harmony she sought seeming to pull her further from the world they all knew. "Elena," Marcus cautioned gently one evening as the choir's voices rose to a near-deafening crescendo, "be careful. This connection, it could consume you. She opened her eyes, dark and luminous, meeting his gaze with a mixture of resolve and fear. "Sometimes," she said softly, "you have to embrace the darkness to understand the light." Her words hung heavily in the cold air as the choir's singing swelled once more, filling every corner of the ancient monastery with its haunting embrace. The expedition was no longer merely observers. They were becoming part of the choir's eternal lament, caught in the frozen grip of faith and fear. And as the night deepened, the question echoed through Marcus's mind, louder than any chant: how long before they too were lost to the choir's embrace? The monastery's cold stone walls seemed to listen, their silence pregnant with the promise of what was yet to come. The air inside the monastery had shifted. What had once been a cold, silent stone shell now pulsed with a subtle but insistent energy, as if the very walls breathed beneath the explorer's feet. Dra. Marcus Hale stood rooted near the arched corridor, his sharp eyes scanning the shadowed end where the faint, sorrowful figure of Father Ambrose had appeared once more. This time, the apparition was different, more urgent, more sorrowful, yet still silent. The wraith-like abbot's hollow eyes seemed to pierce into Marcus's very soul, warning without words of an impending doom that no one dared name. Elena Voss hovered nearby, her dark hair falling softly over her contemplative eyes as she watched the apparition with a mixture of fear and fascination. She felt the weight of the monastery's spiritual residue pressing down on her, the echoing chants weaving through her thoughts like a spectral thread. Her fingers twitched as she hummed a hesitant, tentative note, trying to catch the tone of the choir's haunting melody. The voices seemed to respond, growing in complexity and depth, as if acknowledging her fragile connection. "Did you see that?" Marcus whispered, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was low, cautious. Jonas Reed, standing a few paces away, scoffed but couldn't hide the tension in his stance. "It's a trick of the light, hallucination, or some psychological effect." We retired, stressed, nothing more. But even as he spoke, the unease in his eyes betrayed a growing paranoia. The practical, cynical logistics coordinator, always quick-witted and sarcastic, found himself grasping at explanations that felt increasingly inadequate. The monastery's isolation gnawed at him, the oppressive silence punctuated only by the choir's disembodied voices that seemed to seep from the stones themselves. "Dra." Sylvia Klein adjusted her glasses and bent over her instruments, the small devices blinking softly with spectral readings. "There's something anomalous about the acoustic properties here," she murmured. "These relics embedded in the walls, they are not just ornamental. They're re-amplifying and distorting sound waves in ways I've never seen." Lena Moritz, poring over ancient manuscripts, glanced up. "The inscriptions suggest these artifacts were consecrated during the original pact the monks made," she said quietly. "They might be channeling the voices, binding them to this place." Marcus nodded slowly, his rational mind racing to piece together the fragments. If the relics are the source, or at least a conduit for the choir's power, then they are more than just symbols. They're reactive agents in this supernatural phenomenon. As the group moved deeper into the monastery's shadowed halls, the atmosphere thickened. The carved relics shimmered faintly, their surfaces warping subtly as if reality itself bent around them. The cold intensified, biting through layers of clothing and seeping into bones like a living frost. The choir's chanting rose in volume and complexity, layering angelic harmonies with grotesque overtones that sent shivers down spines. Jonas's demeanor shifted palpably. The scowl etched permanently on his face deepened into something resembling fear. He paced nervously near the chapel's threshold, his voice sharp and brittle as he argued with Marcus and Elena. "We can't just accept this supernatural nonsense," he snapped. "We need facts, evidence. This place is messing with our heads, that's all. If we don't keep control, we'll lose everything." Elena's calm voice cut through the tension. "Sometimes control is an illusion, Jonas. Faith isn't always about facts, it's about connection, spiritual, emotional. The choir sings because it remembers, because it suffers. And that's exactly why we need to be careful, Marcus added, trying to mediate. If the core's voices are trapped souls, bound by some dark pact, then the relics might be the key to their imprisonment and possibly to our escape. But the words felt hollow as the chanting swelled, echoing in waves that pressed against their minds. The monastery seemed alive, its architecture pulsating with a malevolent rhythm that warped perception. Shadows flickered and stretched unnaturally at the edges of vision, and the cold was no longer just temperature, it was a presence. Marcus's journal entries grew frantic in the hours that followed. Hallucinations teased the edges of reality, paranoia seeped into conversations, and the team's unity frayed. Elena's attempts at spiritual connection brought moments of clarity, but also left her vulnerable to the choir's seductive call. Jonas's skepticism cracked, his usual pragmatism replaced by restless anxiety. At one point, Father Ambrose's apparition appeared again, this time standing motionless at the foot of the grand staircase. His hollow eyes seemed to plead silently, an unspoken message of warning and regret. Marcus approached cautiously, feeling the weight of the abbot's tragic duty. "What are you trying to tell us?" he whispered. The ghostly figure's form flickered, and the chanting surged, drowning out all other sound. Marcus felt his own heartbeat quicken, a frozen fear gripping his chest as the choir's layers of sound twisted into a cacophony of beauty and horror. The monastery was no longer merely a place. It was a prison, a trap, a living choir of shadows and echoes. And the relics, they were the cords that bound this eternal song. As the explorers stood amidst the shifting stone and spectral voices, the question hung heavy. How much longer could they resist the choir's embrace before becoming part of the hollow symphony? And in the silence between the chants, the shadows whispered promises and threats alike, leaving no doubt that the past's dark secrets were far from dormant. The chill in the ancient monastery seemed to seep not only into the bones, but into the very minds of the expedition team. That morning, the brittle light of dawn struggled through the stained glass, casting fractured shards of color onto the worn stone floor. Marcus Hale sat on the cold steps of the main hall, his journal resting on his knees. His hand trembled as he scribbled down observations, but the notes no longer bore the clarity of a scholar. They echoed the creeping madness clawing at his reason. He paused, looking up as the faint chanting drifted through the halls, a spectral melody both beautiful and grotesque. His sharp eyes scanned the shadows, watching for movement that wasn't there. The silence between the notes felt oppressive, pregnant with unseen menace. The voices, he wrote, are no longer just sounds. They invade my thoughts, twisting into visions. Last night, I saw figures in the corridor, pale and robed, but when I called out, they vanished. Was it a trick of the mind or something more? Across the monastery, Elena Voss found herself drawn toward a frost-covered window. The cold glass was a barrier to the alpine chill outside, yet it might as well have been a veil between her and the world she once knew. Her breath fogged the pain as she pressed a hand against it, eyes distant. A memory stirred a face, soft and familiar. Her lost sibling, taken years ago under circumstances she barely understood, now haunted by the chants that seemed to echo both grief and hope. Her fingers traced an invisible pattern on the glass, as if trying to grasp the intangible threads tying her past to this forsaken place. The chants wove through her mind, a siren call mingled with sorrow. They suffered, she whispered, and so have I. But is this suffering a bridge to salvation, or a trap? In a nearby chamber, Jurta Sylvia Klein huddled over her equipment, the glow of her laptop casting sharp angles over her face. The recordings she had captured were unlike anything she had encountered, a haunting choir layered with complex acoustic anomalies that defied physical explanation. Patterns emerged within the sound waves, irregular pulses, dissonant undertones, and frequencies that seemed to resonate with the very stone. Sylvia frowned, adjusting the sensitivity. "There's something alive in this acoustic space," she muttered. "Something that shouldn't be." Her scientific mind wrestled with the implications. but the data was irrefutable. As the team gathered around her findings, unease rippled through their ranks. What had begun as an academic expedition was morphing into a nightmare where sound became a weapon and silence a curse. Jonas Reed, standing apart in the shadowed corridor, scowled deeply, his arms crossed tightly, his posture rigid. "This is all nonsense," he snapped, voice low and harsh. "We were letting fear and superstition poison our minds. There's a logical explanation for all this, some natural phenomenon, maybe a trick of the wind or acoustics." Marcus met his glare with a wary stare. "And yet, you vanished last night." Jonas's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but he shook his head. "I was out of it, nothing more. I'm not buying into ghost stories." Their argument sparked tension, the fragile trust between them fraying further. The walls seemed to close in, the echoing chants a relentless reminder of the monastery's grip. Each mind, once steadfast and clear, now battled shadows within. That night, Marcus wrote in his journal by the flickering light of a lantern. The monastery distorts reality, visions, whispers, and memories blend into a waking nightmare. Elena's spiritual connection deepens, but it frightens her. Sylvia's data terrifies me more than any ghost. Jonas fights to hold on to reason, but I fear he is losing. We are fracturing. Faith, reason, hope, all are slipping through our fingers like cold smoke. Outside, the hollow choir sang on, its voices threading through the stone corridors like a living thing. The expedition stood at the precipice of madness, their minds fractured and fragile, caught between the frozen fear that gripped their souls and the echoing chants that promised salvation or doom. And still, the monastery waited, silent but alive, ready to claim whatever remained of those who dared to listen. The monastery was never truly silent, but that night the voices emerged with a terrifying clarity, a crescendo of chanting that filled every corner and crevice of the ancient stone structure. Juta Marcus Hale sat rigid in his makeshift quarters, the flickering candlelight barely holding back the shadows creeping across the walls. The choir's song was no longer distant, it was a suffocating presence, reverberating through the air and into his bones. Outside his door, footsteps echoed faintly, Jonas Reed's usual scowl replaced by a grimace of unease. Marcus had noticed the change in Jonas over the past days. The skeptic was cracking beneath the weight of the monastery's oppressive atmosphere. Now, as the chanting swelled, something in Jonas seemed drawn to it, as if the invisible voices called him closer. Elena Voss, sitting nearby with her eyes closed, hummed softly along with the ethereal chorus. Her connection to the spiritual realm had deepened in the monastery's presence, and tonight, that connection seemed almost painful. She opened her eyes, meeting Marcus's gaze with a calm tinged by dread. "It's getting worse," she whispered. "The choir, it's like it's alive." Marcus nodded, swallowing the rising knot of fear. "We need to check on Jonas." They found him standing at the end of the corridor, staring into the darkness, where the chanting seemed strongest. His body was rigid, eyes glazed, unresponsive to their calls. "Jonas," no reply came. Suddenly the chanting surged, a wave of sound that pressed against their eardrums. Then, as if swallowed by the very walls, Jonas was gone. No trace, no sound of footsteps, nothing but the choir's persistent echoes. Panic erupted. Marcus and Elena split to search the labyrinthine halls. Their voices bounced futilely against the cold stone, met only by the unyielding chant. Dra. Sylvia Klein followed, her scientific instruments whirring, detecting strange acoustic anomalies that defied explanation. "This isn't natural," Sylvia muttered, eyes wide as the readings spiked inexplicably. Hours passed with no sign of Jonas. The team's hope began to unravel, replaced by a chilling realization. The choir was not just a sound, but a malevolent force consuming those it ensnared. Back in the main hall, Marcus slammed his fist against the ancient wood. "We can't just wait for it to take us all. We need a plan." Elena's voice was steady, though her eyes reflected the frozen fear within. "The choir demands a price. Jonas paid it tonight. We have to understand what binds these voices before it's too late." As silence finally descended, it was heavier than any sound. The absence of Jonas's voice was a void that screamed louder than the choir itself. The monastery had claimed another soul, and the expedition teetered on the edge of despair and madness. Outside, the Alps loomed cold and indifferent, their frostbitten peaks mirroring the frozen terror that gripped the survivors. The hollow choir's song was eternal, and now, so was the fear. But the night was far from over, and the shadows whispered that Jonas's fate was only the beginning. The team gathered in the dim light of the main chamber, their faces pale, eyes wide with shock and grief. Marcus's journal lay open on a stone altar, the ink smeared from trembling hands. "We can't stay here," he declared, voice cracking. "This place isn't just haunted. It's alive." Elena reached out, placing a steady hand on his arm. "We need to be careful. The choir feeds on fear and doubt. If we panic, it wins." Duh. Sylvia adjusted her glasses, glancing at the data streaming from her devices. The acoustic patterns suggest the voices are trapped in some kind of resonance. "We might be able to disrupt it." Marcus nodded slowly, the leader's resolve returning. "We find a way to break the cycle, or we die trying." The chanting began again, softer now, a sinister lullaby that promised both salvation and damnation. The monastery held its breath, waiting for the next note in its endless, hollow choir. And somewhere in the dark, Jonas's voice was gone but not forgotten, a vanished chord in the symphony of frozen fear. As dawn's pale light crept through the stained glass windows, the survivors faced a grim truth. The monastery was no longer just a place of study. It was a trap. And the choir was hungry. Marcus stared out at the icy peaks, the weight of leadership heavier than ever. Elena whispered a prayer, her faith tested but unbroken. Sylvia packed her instruments, determined to uncover the scientific truth behind the horror. But the question lingered: how many more would the choir claim before the expedition was silenced forever? The monastery waited, patient and eternal, its hollow choir ready to sing on.